feel beauty rising.
Hi, my name is Sue Skasky with Vermont Volunteer Services for Animals Humane Society, and welcome to our show for the animals. Today we have a returning guest, Nancy Carey. Thank you for coming, Nancy.
Thank you for having me.
Nancy is a licensed wildlife rehabilitator since 1992, and she's licensed by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. You care for small animals that are mammals.
Yes.
You specialize in rabies vector species such as raccoon, skunks, fox, woodchucks, which are also groundhogs?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for coming all the way down today.
Thanks for having me here.
And
it's a pleasure.
You came down to relocate. How many were there? 8?
Eight young raccoons.
Would they be considered teenagers?
Juveniles.
Juveniles.
Yeah, older
Okay.
juveniles.
Juveniles at VVSA's Wildlife Sanctuary. Location hidden. And they are comical. Okay, Nancy, for people that might not have seen you before, what is wildlife rehabilitation?
Well, wildlife rehabilitation is taking in wild animals that are injured or orphaned or sick, and taking care of them and putting them back into the wild. So the goal is not to make exotic pets out of them, but to put them back where they belong, back into the wild.
And you had made a statement they belong to all Vermonters. What does that mean?
That means that it's a natural resource. Wildlife is one of our natural resources, and so nobody can own the wildlife in Vermont. That means that in order to do anything with wildlife, you have to have a license or a permit.
Okay, which is why you're licensed to care for these creatures.
Yes, even though they're with me temporarily, I don't keep them long term.
Mm-hmm.
They go back into the wild.
No, they were wild.
They were wild.
Nancy, why would wild animals come into your care?
Well, sometimes it's because of pet predation, dogs and cats, cars, being hit by a car, excavation, landscaping, people burning brush, deliberate orphaning, where someone's trapped the mother and relocated her, and then the babies are left. And people don't understand what wildlife are all about, and so they react when they...
They panic.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Oh, it's got rabies. It's got rabies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or, they just don't think of the consequences. They just do react. They see a wild animal in their yard and they immediately go into some type of mode of removing that animal without thinking or finding out what they can do about it.
So how do you know if an animal does need help?
Usually, if it's in harm's way, if it's in the middle of a road or the middle of a parking lot, obviously then it does need to be moved out of that area. If it's got wounds on it that are obvious, you see blood on the sidewalk or something like that, if there's flies on it, or if your pet brings it home. If your dog or your cat brings a little wild animal home, then it definitely needs some care.
Okay. So what should the public know about living with wildlife?
Well, one thing is that in most cases, and with most species, the Fish and Wildlife Department doesn't want people relocating them. So if you have an animal that you want to remove from your property, don't trap it and put it somewhere else. Call a professional and find out what can be done and how you can encourage that animal to move on its own. That's one of the things. Look critically at where you live, your home, your garage, your shed, your porch, your deck, and see if there's any repairs that need to be made so that the squirrel doesn't move into your attic and the raccoon doesn't live down in your chimney. So make those repairs. Fall is a good time to do those things. It's a good time to do any landscaping, burning of brush, because there are no babies around. The babies are grown up, and most of the animals are out and about and not in dens. So that's a good time to make repairs on your house or your garage and exclude them before winter comes, because they're going to be, once winter comes, they're going to be looking for safe, dry places to sleep. So even if they don't hibernate, they will look for shelter, just like we would.
That's a good question, okay, that I have. Hibernate. What animals hibernate?
Well, bears hibernate, we know that.
Do raccoons?
Raccoons sleep a lot, skunks sleep a lot, but they don't hibernate. They're up and down.
Really?
During the winter.
Okay, how about groundhogs?
They actually wake up Groundhog Day What Groundhog
Not
Day
intentionally.
is, what that's all about is breeding.
Really?
Yes, they get up, the boys go to the girls' den, they breed so that in the springtime babies are born. They don't do their breeding. Wildlife does not do their breeding in the springtime. They do it in the winter time, and the babies are born in the springtime.
Do the girls wake up?
I don't know. Never been privy to a woodchuck den.
Wow. Think of a lot of jokes to go with that.
Yes.
That's interesting. So what's the gestation period? Is it the same for
It's
wildlife?
usually a couple of months. Yeah. So if they're bred in typically in January and February, the dead of winter, then they'll have their babies in April and May, and April through May, beginning of June. It's not unusual for some girls to come into heat later in the winter and have babies later. So you'll see younger animals later in the summertime. And my theory is that that's a survival rate. If there was a natural disaster that wiped out all the young, flooding, whatever, then there's an insurance policy that some of the girls would have some babies later on in the season.
Very interesting. Well, I know from my own experience that possum do not hibernate.
No.
We have the most precious little creature that comes on our deck and eats with a cat. And then, I don't know if I told you last time, Greg made a box. I have this cat 10 years and she still won't come in the house, so it's a heated box in the wintertime.
Nice.
We couldn't figure out where the heck the possum was going. It was going inside the box with the cat, and that's where it spent the winter. It's like very strange.
I think sometimes we could take a lesson from the wild animals that we can get along.
You're absolutely right. Okay, so few people understand what's around them and what wildlife in their neighborhood are doing. What should people know?
Animals are looking for the same thing that we look for. The same things that we need are what they need. They need food and they need shelter. And so if there's shelter available and we've made it available, they're going to use that. If we put food out for our birds, watching birds, and feed our pets outside, then there's going to be wildlife coming to take advantage of that.
We had a situation where a woman was putting food down for the raccoons, or for her raccoon. And in the spring, the raccoon gave birth to its young, and then the people came back to move into Quechee Lakes. They flipped out when they saw the raccoon, called an exterminator and killed the raccoon, leaving the babies behind. The raccoon was very tame because this woman had been feeding it all along. Big mistake.
Yes,
You
yes,
know?
it is. If you don't want wildlife coming around, you need to pick up. Even if you put your bird feeders out, which I do, we put bird feeders out. We like to see the birds come. Every night we take all of those bird feeders in, every single night, because otherwise I'm going to attract animals I don't want to see, like the bear.
I never thought about that, but that makes sense.
So you have to look at what you're doing that contributes to the problem that you don't want to have, conflict with wildlife.
And do you find many wildlife that go down chimneys?
Yes.
What do you do?
It's
I
fairly
mean,
common.
yeah.
It's pretty common. It's recommended that you cap your chimneys. That will keep the birds out, it'll keep the mother raccoon out, it'll keep all her little babies out, and she'll find a better place to live.
Okay. If you see a wildlife animal in the daytime, does that mean it's sick?
No, it usually means that they didn't have success the night before finding some food, and so they're still hungry, and so they're out prowling around. It also may mean that they're youngsters and they're finding out what life is all about. They're leaving the den and learning what it is to survive in the wild. So they're coming out, playing around the den, the opening, maybe foraging with mom, mother skunks, take her little brood, following behind her, and teach them how to find food. So just because you see an animal out in the daytime doesn't mean it's sick. Just like if we saw a dog out at nighttime in somebody's yard, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with that dog.
Right.
The dog's usually out in the daytime, so we have to think about those things. What's the animal doing, and how is it acting? A fox going across your yard or a pasture in the daytime means that he didn't succeed at hunting last night. So he's still looking for food.
Yeah, not in my yard. I did have a friend who was convinced that the raccoon in her yard was rabid because it was out during the day, and she said it was acting funny. what are other reasons other than rabies that a raccoon could act funny? I mean, distemper, right?
Yes,
Or,
yes. Feeling threatened. If it's in a garage and you come into the garage and it thinks that it can't get past you, it may act defensively. It certainly doesn't want an encounter with you. It wants to leave. It wants to get by you. So the best thing is, of course, to back off and let it go. Don't panic. So all of those responses are normal for a wild animal. It's they're going to hiss and snort and puff up and make themselves look as big as they can in trying to intimidate you into leaving it alone. That's what they want. They just want to go about the business of being whatever they are, a skunk, a fox, a porcupine.
what about later in the fall when the apples have been on the ground and they start to ferment? What happens?
Well, a lot of animals will take advantage of that, and sometimes they'll eat too much and get a little groggy, a little
buzzed,
intoxicated.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's another thing that could cause them.
And other animals have a strange gait. Porcupines waddle when they walk, so they look like they may have an injury, and they don't. That's just the way they move. Yeah, so.
Okay. Well, unfortunately for this poor raccoon, it was taken off by Fish and Wildlife. And so it wasn't relocated.
No.
It was just destroyed.
No.
Which is a real shame, I think.
Unfortunately, the department usually looks for the quickest fix to a problem. And people don't realize that that's what the solution's going to be.
Yeah.
It takes more time to deal with an animal. But in the long run, it's much more satisfying for the person who's resolved the conflict in a humane, non-lethal way. And it is always possible. You know, there's lots of ways to encourage an animal to move on its own.
Yeah. Well, she was convinced that, they took care of it. It was humane. I said, what are you talking about? Oh, they relocated it. No, they did not relocate
No,
it.
they
So
don't
people don't
relocate
want
animals.
to know.
No.
They don't want to know.
They don't.
But talking about, you just made me remember the skunks that you brought down a couple weeks ago, the little skunks. They are the most comical little creatures. I went to check on them the other day in the shed, and I'd come up on feeding time. And one was in the bowl, and immediately as I rounded the corner, I guess I didn't make enough noise, a little tail went up, it looked at me, and did a little like hop sideways. It's like, it's okay, it's just me.
And then usually they say, oh, okay. And
Yeah.
the tail goes down, and they go back to being little skunks,
Yeah.
doing exactly what they're supposed to.
I just wonder how the raccoons and the skunk are going to get along.
Well, they mutually respect, so they get along outside in the wild just fine. You know, they each make their pathways around each other.
Now, where you rehabilitate them, can they see each other, or are they only the raccoons by themselves and the skunks?
They know. Animals have great senses of smell, and so they know that there's other wildlife in the area. You know, within. I've let the baby raccoons see the little skunks when they're foraging around, and they're pretty curious, and they just perk up and look at them.
Yeah.
And then they decide, well, let's go back and play.
I'd love to watch them playing today.
Yes.
They just look like kittens, like adult kittens. You know, very precious. Well, hopefully we'll have some nice video to include on that.
Great.
When we find out that there's a wild animal living in our structures, what should we do?
Well, if it's springtime, sometime between March and June, you need to assume that there's babies in there. And so you don't want to be trapping mother and moving her.
Okay.
And it is in the wintertime that they breed, so the babies are born in the springtime. All female wildlife have babies. So, you know, if you have trapped an animal, you need to look and see whether, you know, if it's a little squirrel, see if that's a female, a lactating female. When you've got her in the trap, let her go, and find out where she's going and where she's getting into, if it's in one of your structure, and make those repairs. We need to be responsible for our own living. It's not, for one thing, it's illegal to relocate animals, and you should check with the Fish and Wildlife Department about that. And it's not humane to do.
What's the reasoning behind that? I mean, if you've trapped a groundhog, okay, you don't want the groundhog in your garden. You've trapped it. What do you
don't
say?
want to put it in your neighbor's garden or in the farmer's garden down the road.
I like my groundhogs. I have two.
Exactly.
Doesn't bother me, but
Yes.
what are you supposed to do with them?
Encourage them to go on their own. If you've got a garden, then you should protect your garden. put a fence around it. You're going to keep the deer out. You're going to keep the woodchucks out, the bunny rabbits, instead of trying to eliminate wildlife. We don't want to eliminate wildlife from Vermont. This is one of our wonderful natural resources, is having wildlife. So we need to be responsible for what we've got. Our structures, our food supplies, our gardens. If the garden is valuable to you, fence it in.
My friend Lawrence always said, and he used to garden every year, he said he planted 1/3 for himself, 1/3 for Mother Nature, and 1/3 for the animals, knowing some would be taken. And I thought that was a great way to think.
Yes.
Okay, so what else should people understand about animals? Anything else you can think of?
Well, let's see. Animals, wildlife have a very tough time surviving. It's not easy for them. And we shouldn't make it harder on them.
How long do they usually live? If everything, panned out for them?
They can live a nice, long, healthy life. I've got a raccoon that I happened to release several years ago, 5 years ago, at my house. And so 5 years later, she's still around.
It's pretty short. It's only 5 years?
It seems short. The average lifespan of a cottontail is 1 year.
No kidding.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes, but of course domestic rabbits live a long time. So yeah, 10 years for a squirrel would be a long time.
Skunks?
Most, maybe 10 years. But most wildlife doesn't live that long. Most wild animals don't die of old age, unfortunately. And we also have to remember that everything that's out there gets eaten, including predators, raptors, and the high predators. Nothing goes to waste out in the wild. One thing that I think about is that we're the only ones that bury our dead. So, nature recycles everything. Everything goes back into
That's true.
nature. Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
So one of the things that I'd like to have people take away is that when we have a wildlife encounter, instead of reacting emotionally, we need to use our heads and think things through and recognize it for what it is. It's a raccoon that's defending her babies. It's a squirrel that is looking for a nice dry place to have her young, where they're not going to feel threatened. And so we need to think about things, and we need to find non-lethal solutions too.
Well, I have something that's actually taken one of my cats, and so what we've done around the yard, Greg just hooked up radios on either side of the house that go off at dusk. And also, and this is true, and it's worked, urine. If you put urine in a jar, so you're not just dumping it out, but put the jars along the stone wall every 25 feet or so. Animals are very sensitive,
Yes.
very territorial, and they smell it. And you know what? Knock on wood, so far I haven't lost anybody.
Excellent, excellent.
Then I have the traps, and to be honest, I don't know what I would do if I found out it was a fisher or a coyote, because I can't kill that. I mean, it's not like that's going out to the food store to get its dinner. I mean, it's heartbreaking, and we can't continue to do what we do with cats if I had them all in the house. They have their in and out, but it's a hard decision.
It is a hard decision, but they don't have a choice like we do.
Right.
We have a choice of where our food comes from and what we eat.
Exactly.
They don't have that choice. That coyote has to hunt, the fisher has to hunt, the hawk and owl have to hunt. Great horned owls like skunks, and so
Really?
skunks are prey for great horned owls, and so they don't have those options that we have. So we do have to be aware of that, and we shouldn't make it harder on them. Nor should we make it easy on them by putting food out for them.
That's true.
So we have to keep an eye on those things, and like you found a solution.
It works.
Keeping the
It really,
predators
somebody taught me that a long time ago, and it really does do the trick. Of course, it takes every year somebody disappearing, say, "Oh God, I got to get that out again," or collect.
Well, we have that happen. We have a lot of wildlife come through our yard, different animals at different times of the year, and my husband tends to get upset when he sees a fox come through and take one of the squirrels. What are you going to do? The fox doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
He's not going to make a kill every time he hunts, and so it is sad, especially if you've raised the squirrel. But that's what it's about. Wildlife rehabilitation is about giving an animal a second chance. Second chance. And it's not the best chance. The best one was being with its mother.
Right.
So,
Well, you brought some leaflets with you, and I think
Yes.
I'd like to show these because anybody could get these from the Humane Society of the United States by going online, probably?
Yes,
One on
Or calling
raccoon,
them.
foxes, you're right, foxes. Is it fox or foxes? Beavers, coyotes, and pigeons. So it's good to know that you can turn to a source for your answers.
Yes.
How many wildlife rehabilitators are there in the state, roughly?
I think there's 19. We need more.
We need more. So what would somebody do if they wanted to become one?
Well, get in touch with the Fish and Wildlife Department and ask for a packet of information, an application. Get in touch with me and I'll give them some written resources and also some online contacts of the national organization. There will be a conference in Lake George by the New York State organization.
Do you know when that is?
It's going to be in October this year.
Is it a
that's-
one day or a weekend or
It's
what?
almost a full week. There's field trips and there's special seminars like basic training courses ahead of time. If you wanted a license to do rabies vectors, there's a full day of that. And then they get into a 3-day conference.
I think that's great, Nancy. I'd love to be able to promote that.
Multiple topics, multiple speakers, everything from medical care to working with your veterinarian to different species, the biology, the nursing, the formulas, all of that.
So when you if you went and attended that week long or whatever it is, when you come out, would you have the skills that you would need to become a rehabilitator?
Basic skills, yes.
I think that, okay, I have to write that one down.
There's lots of nuances to handling wild animals.
Yeah.
Each one, we have a saying, know your species. Each species is different, and then each individual has their own personality. So how you hold a squirrel when it's nursing is different from how you hold a bottle for a raccoon or what you do with a baby skunk when you're caring for them. But basic knowledge, this is a good place to start, an excellent place to start.
Would you be able to train under a licensed rehabilitator?
You could. That's the best way to find out whether you're suited for it, whether the commitment that you have to make is going to fit with your lifestyle and with your family.
Okay, well, you know what, in closing, I just want to say Nancy has spent this spring so far practically round the clock caring for orphaned animals. What number have you had?
35 baby skunks and about 32 baby raccoons. And I have 2 little cottontails right now, but I don't specialize in cottontails. And
Wow.
so there's a lot of need out there. There's lots of baby squirrels. There'll be second litters coming in. And so there's just a great need. So anybody that has a love for wildlife and something beyond that love. The love gets you started, but it's other things that carry you through. A sense of commitment, fixation on the goal, releasing the animals back into the wild and not making pets out of them. And you can't make pets out of wild animals anyway. They're always wild. But
And this takes not only personal commitment, realistically it takes money.
it takes money.
The formula is not cheap.
It isn't. And the species, it depends, the cost of that depends on the type of animals that you do. Certainly, taking care of a bear for 2 years is going to be more expensive than taking care of a cottontail for 2 weeks. So there's a big variance there. Little songbirds, high commitment because they need to be fed every half hour from sunrise to sunset, but they fledge in a week or 2.
Are you 501c3 yet?
I'm not.
Okay. For contributions to support Nancy or other wildlife rehabilitators, you can certainly call Vermont Volunteer Services for Animals Humane Society. All contributions are fully tax deductible and they would go towards the care of Nancy's wildlife creatures.
Thank you.
Just make sure you make a note of it on your check and you could send that to VVSA Humane Society, P.O. Box 100 in Bridgewater, 05034. Attention, Nancy Carey, on your little notation box. And you know for sure it'll go to good use.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nancy,
And
thank you for everything. And I'm going to make sure go back tomorrow and get some more video of the raccoons and
All
include
right.
it. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much for watching our show For the Animals, and join us again next week.
At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment when all was known. You could feel beauty rising on the breeze, the shapes, the stone, and I would ride upon the breeze that shapes the stone, across the sky and beyond, to that place where all is known. when I could fly, when I could fly down that road.